Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are going to cover the module Environment and Economics from the paper Environment and Society. I am Devisha. I am a faculty at Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Basically, today's module we are going to cover about we are going to introduce about the natural resources, their classifications, values and concepts of valuation. Today's contents of discussion would be thus: introduction to natural resources, types of natural resources, distribution of natural resources specifically to the Indian subcontinent, values of nature, valuation of nature, categories of uses, environment economics, problems of economic valuation. So let's get into the introduction part of natural resources first. Natural resources are materials of natural origin that can be used to satisfy human needs, and these natural resources include water, land, biodiversity, minerals and fossil fuels, wind and sunlight. Now, the characteristics of natural resources, the technology available for its use, the social and political factors that influence access to these resources are all significant factors that affect human beings. Now, in economic terms, natural resources are stocks of materials that exist in natural environment that are useful in production or consumption, either in their raw state or after a minimal amount of processing. Now, air, seawater, etc. are not a direct use for production or consumption. But however, technology can turn these resources, these into natural resources. For example, production of fresh water from seawater is possible today. Hence, it is also called a natural resource. In recent times, lifestyles at a certain section of societies are leading towards overconsumption of these resources and leading to its depletion. And thus, there is a need to ensure sustainable and equitable use of natural resources to achieve human development in an overall case. Let's move on to the topic types of natural resources. Now, natural resources can be classified on the basis of their origin, biotic and abiotic. So, biotic natural resource is obtained from living and organic material of biological origin such as fish, fodder, etc. Now, fossil fuels such as coal and petroleum are also included in this category because they are formed from decayed organic matter. Now, abiotic means resources are those which come from non-living, non-organic material, example water, minerals, water, metals, etc., not minerals. Another useful way of classifying resources is between renewable and non-renewable resources. Now, what is renewable resource and a non-renewable resource? Let's cover the first part, which is the renewable resource. Renewable resources is a resource that either increases in quantity or otherwise renews itself over a short period of time. Now, it should be economically relevant short period of time. Now, hence, if the rate of extraction takes account of limitations in the reproductive capacity of resources, renewables can provide yields over an infinite time horizon. Now, example of renewable resources are water, sunlight, etc. Of course, the time frame for renewal must be economically relevant, as I mentioned earlier, since some resources may be renewable in principle but not in practice. For example, forest. If you cut down forests as a resource system, it takes n number of years for it to reproduce. For example, it takes at least 15 plus years to have an entire forest coming up, at least trees to grow up. So, it's practically not a renewable resource. A renewable resource can be exhaustible, that is, it can be exhausted by overuse or more use, or non-exhaustible as well, that is, cannot be exhausted by more use. Now, sunlight is a non-exhaustible renewable resource, but fish in a wetland ecosystem can be exhaustible. If you overfish it, that means the fish can get depleted. Now, let's come on to the topic on non-renewable resource. Non-renewable resources are defined as all resources that do not grow or otherwise renew themselves over time. They exist in finite quantities, so every unit consumed today reduces the amount available for future consumption. The most common examples of non-renewable resources are fossil fuels and mineral deposits. All of these are exhaustible resources and have to be used prudently per se. Now, considering their stage of development, natural resources can be classified as actual, potential, reserve and stock resources. Now, let's look into the first category, which is the actual resource. Actual resources are those that have been surveyed, their quantity and quality determined and are being used in present times. Example, surface water is an actual resource. Its use depends upon the technology available and the cost involved. Now, what is a potential resource? The next category that we are going to talk about are these are those that exist in a region and may be used in future. Example, oil and natural gas occurs in within a specific region per se, but until the time it is actually drilled out and pulled out to use, it remains a potential resource. Now, let's talk about what is a reserve resource. Reserve resource is the part of an actual resource which can be developed profitably in future, and that's what is called a reserve resource. Now, let's come to the part of what is stock resource. Stock resources are those that has been surveyed but cannot be used at present due to lack of technology. For example, hydrogen. Now, shale gas was once a stock resource. Now, since there is technology to extract it, it is no more a stock resource. The next topic that we are going to cover is about the distribution of natural resources. Now, many resources are concentrated in small number of countries while others have limited domestic supplies. Now, nearly 90% of world's proved oil reserves are located in just 15 countries. That is, more than 200 countries are there in the world, and it's only present in 15 specific countries. Now, international trade moves these resources from one area which has excess supply to areas of excess demand. Now, which also serve to promote the most efficient use of these products. Now, many disputes over natural resources are there and can escalate even into riots. For example, the drift between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka over water resource, the river systems that they share is one example that we can look into. Now, in India, one can clearly now notice how distribution and access of natural resources has a social and political dimension as well. In the social hierarchy per se, dominant groups have ownership and access to large amounts of resources as compared to marginal groups. Let's start on the topic of natural resources, specifically to India. The geology, geography and environment patterns of India lead to concentration of certain resources in some regions and scarcity in others. You can take the example of rainfall per se. Rainfall that Kerala or Assam gets is nothing compared to the rain that Rajasthan as a state gets. So, the same way, plant and animal resources also vary with soil, forest type and climate of the region. Now, the non-renewable resources of India are mapped and assessed for their economic worth. However, what is very interesting is that the non-renewable resources are still not being assessed, and that enormous economic value are undermined or neglected for a long period of time, in spite of the fact that they are very essential for most of the livelihoods of the marginalized communities, or even millions of the communities that depend on these natural resource systems. The value of resources became obvious only when, or becomes basically obvious only when they start getting scarce and conflicts arise over the access and ownership of resources. Now, again, as an example, I can give you, the one that I discussed, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, or even Kerala and Tamil Nadu, or conflicts over land that we see in rural parts of India or even urban parts of India. There are conflicts over ownership of trees, fish in the pond, etc. These are all common factors that you see in a rural, setting. Even sea, which has ample fish, is now, and it's theoretically a renewable resource, and you don't find so much fish if it is, there's a fish drought in certain parts of India because of overfishing. Now, the development of India can only be achieved by understanding the true value and livelihood importance of natural resources per se. Now, we will be moving on to understand what is the value of basically nature. Now, all people are dependent on nature. So either directly or indirectly, we're all dependent on nature. You know, it could be for sustaining activities, it could be for a livelihood activity, it could be just for a day-to-day activity as such. This goes beyond the economic valuation, and viewing nature simply as providing goods and services in the form of natural resources is just not enough. Like, while it is well known that plants use up carbon dioxide and release oxygen, we breathe that oxygen, it is very less known, or it's not so obvious that fungi in small soil invertebrates and even microbes are essential for plants to grow. So a natural forest maintains the water in river after the monsoon, and absence of ants could destroy the life on earth. These are very small, intricate factors that many of us do not know. Now this needs to be appreciated and understood well before we start calculating the worth of forest in terms of timber and wood, or of any other resource only in the worth of productivity, or how productive is it for us human beings per se. So here we will now look into evaluation of nature. That is the next topic that we are going to cover. We had covered about the value of nature and how important it is not to look at value of nature in terms of just economic factors, but also those small intricate factors that is knitted into making natural resources which are available to us. So the valuation of nature, this discussion would be basically on how we do the valuation of nature per se. So in recent times, attempts have been made to devise measures for calculating value of nature. More focus has been on valuation of natural resources, often in monetary terms, but other values of ecosystems and biodiversity should also be recognized. So there are, we can divide values of nature into two types here: direct values and indirect values. What is a direct value? Direct values are where humans make actual use of materials obtained from nature. For example, consuming fruits or plants, vegetables for our daily use. Now let's come into indirect values. What is an indirect value? Indirect values are those that are not associated with actual use or even an option to use materials from nature. For example, saving a species is an indirect value that is added to the natural resource system. Now, there are also different categories other than direct and indirect. We also can categorize into use value and non-use value. Use value is defined as the value derived from actual use of a good or service. Now, non-use value is a value assigned to a resource even if it is not being used or will not be used in future. Now, there are various categories of uses of these natural resource systems as such. One could be the consumptive use value, productive use value, social and cultural value, ethical values, aesthetic values, ecological or environmental service values, or optional values. Now let's look into the first category, which is the consumptive use value. Consumptive use value in this is a direct use value that refers to non-market value of resources such as fruits, grasses, etc. Such resources are consumed directly without passing through a market. They usually are not calculated, but are often approximated per se. For example, people can directly collect fuel wood from the forest or medicinal plants from the forest, fish or herbs from the natural surroundings. However, those who do not have this access needs to acquire them by other means. For example, people living in urban areas have to buy fruits, vegetables, etc., rather than procuring it from by themselves. Now let's come to the next category, which is the productive use value. Productive use value, in this is a direct use value that ascribed to resources which can be sold or exchanged in the market. Example, fruits, fish, vegetables, etc. can be collected and sold in local markets per se. In many cases, value addition is done on small or large scale to improve the commercial value or the marketability. For example, smoked or dry fish fetches more money than the actual fish per se, or fruits can be processed into jams or even pickles for that matter, and it basically gives you more return. Now let's come into the next category, which is the social and cultural value. This is an indirect value, use value ascribed by community as a part of social or cultural beliefs. Now, plants such as tulsi or people are considered sacred and many myths are attached to them. So, snake, another example would be snake is considered as a symbol of good in some societies and evil in another society. Another example would be springs, streams and rivers that are considered homes of deities, and many rituals are carried out next to flowing rivers. The next category would be the ethical value that we are going to discuss. This is an indirect value, a non-use value again. Some cultures believe that all forms of life have right to exist, and they ascribe ethical values to natural elements. Hunting communities often believe that it is wrong to kill a pregnant animal or mothers with young ones. Children are taught not to harm animals or respect water resources per se. They are often told not to waste water. What is it that? What is that makes a elderly person tell a younger one that you should not waste water? It is the ethical value attached to it. Now, feeding birds, putting out water during summer are considered great services to life, which are not always reflected in which are not always related to religious beliefs. Now let's come to the aesthetic values. This can be considered a direct non-use value. It is ascribed towards aesthetics or pleasures derived from a species, a landscape or ecosystem in a non-consumptive manner. Now, viewing nature for appreciating its beauty or gaining peace is common that you see from aesthetic value. It also provides opportunities for recreational activities like bird watching, photography, etc. The next category that we are going to explain is about the ecological or environmental service values. Now, value attached to environmental or ecological processes that are necessary for sustaining humans is what is called this particular ecological values per se. Now, example, forests maintain pure air, pure water and reduce carbon dioxide, which helps protect against global warming. Another example would be pollination ensures fertilization and seed production, which is important for cultivation per se. Now, the final value that we would be talking about, the category of values that we would be talking about is the option values. This is a non-use value again. UNEP in 1995 has defined option value as a potential value of the resource for future, that is direct or indirect use. Option value is sometimes derived from the piece an individual is willing to pay to retain the options of using services at a future date. Example, while plants may not be of direct use at present, but might be of some great importance because of its gene that could basically develop a disease resistance or a medicine that can be made out of it. Now, there are other types of non-use values also. Bequest value and existence value are the two other types of non-use values. Let's look into what is the bequest values. Bequest values refers to the value of an individual ascribes to the knowledge that others may benefit from a resource or service in the future. Now, the next category is the existence value. Existence value is derived from the knowledge that an environmental resource or service exists. Now that we've covered about the various categories of values, let's come to this new topic, that is environmental economics. Environmental economists often make the distinction between goods and services provided by ecosystems. This distinction is made based on use and non-use value. Thus, environmental goods have use value while services have non-use value. But Often the ecosystem goods harvested by people, such as fruits or fish or vegetables, are products of ecosystem processes such as biotic interactions, energy flow, nutrient cycle, where the goods and services remain interlinked or linked per se. Now let's come to what are the problems that are associated with economic valuation. Economic valuation calculates the value of ecosystem services or goods in terms of money is very difficult per se. However, it has been tried in many cases to help in decision making and research. Example, value of forest can be calculated in terms of the timber to be obtained from it, or in terms of the minerals it can be gained from mining a particular area in the forest, or in terms of local economies that depend on the forest ecosystem for their subsistence. Now this helps in making a cost benefit analysis, and a better option can be chosen. This poses many problems in practice though. Now valuation techniques, particularly with respect to indirect use values or non-use values, involve subjective value judgments of people living in modern urbanized societies. Now application of such value judgments to societies with radically different social and cultural and even economic structures poses methodological difficulties and also raise moral and ethical issues. The valuation techniques are suitable for fully monetized economies with individuals who are well informed about their rights and choices. But the same cannot be applied to subsistence economics having multiple cultures and diverse value systems. For example, river might be valuable as a resource for irrigation for farmers who want to dam it probably so that they can store water for irrigation. While the fishermen depend on fish in the river will prefer a flowing river because it basically nurtures fish diversity. The costs and benefits actual and perceived of a resource will differ for different sectors of the society, and simple valuation may not take into account variations among these different sectors of society and in assigning value to these resources. So valuation of culture, religion, spiritual values of nature cannot be calculated at all. Many benefits remain difficult to quantify in terms of money. For example, forest dwellers may use a variety of medicinal plants, but their valuation as a healthcare practice is difficult. The productivity per se of ecosystem goods, which form the basis of subsistence economies, depend on the functioning of the ecosystems. So another problematic area that we should discuss is about the valuation in terms of contribution of ecosystems to human knowledge. It is well known that humans are accumulated a large body of practical knowledge about nature due to their close experiences with it. Now plant breeding techniques evolved only due to close watching the processes of natural pollination or selection, etc. The architecture, the art forms have grown through watching architecture in nature, and this value eludes all economic considerations. Now, the environmental economists have attempted to calculate monetary values in many ways. Let's take the first scenario. By estimating the number of people who derive their livelihoods from nature is the first aspect that we are going to see. So in India alone, approximately 50 million people are assumed to live in and around forests and presumably derive a subsistence level of their livelihood from forest products. Now in Brazil again, 15 million people or 20% of the economically active persons in the Amazon region derive a significant portion of their livelihood from extraction of natural resources. Now the next category that we would be talking about is the value of particular crops of fish, etc. in market. We can also calculate monetary values by looking at the value of particular crops, fish, etc. in the market. Now, the Tendu leaves generate an annual revenue of around 160 million US dollars for the state of Madhya Pradesh in India and contribute to cash income of households. In West Bengal, non-timber products, forest products, including fuel wood and fodder from young generating forests, contribute 22% of the cash income of village households in and around the forest. Now, another way in which it can be calculated, the value can be calculated, is the total GDP derived from ecosystem goods. GDP often does not take into account the ecosystem services, and the figures for ecosystem goods are also underestimated. So, in India, one of the primary analysis conducted by Lai in 1992 says that the annual rent from forests for both goods and services was found to, that the rent is more than 25% of the GDP. Now, officially, the contribution of forestry to GDP is only 12%. Now, the next way in which we calculate the value is the value of services on a per hectare basis in case of ecosystems. Now, for dry deciduous forests in India, it is estimated that the value of non-timber forest products and services such as soil conservation, nutrient cycle, and tourism and recreation to be in the range of 5,220 to 8,335 US dollars per hectare per year. Now, such figures are often used by government while claiming compensation from mining companies which cut down forests for mining purposes. Now, the discussion so far shows how the importance of natural resources, various value ascribed to it by humans, and the recent attempts to calculate the values in economic terms per se. Although this is an evolving field, it has found many applications in management decisions regarding conservation, utilization of natural resources, etc. The discussion so far, we have discussed about the introduction about natural resources, the various values that are ascribed to it by humans, and also how it is calculated in the economic terms per se. Now, although it is a very evolving field, researches and various methods are used, these valuation techniques are used for conservation and management of natural resources. For further reading, I would suggest you to go to ePathshala resource systems, and also I hope that you have learned from this module. Thank you.